Alright, so this presentation is going to be for Microsoft 365 security features. This is definitely going to be a crash course because there are a lot, and it really depends on what you're going to be doing. Just as a show of hands, who here works in the Microsoft 365 environment? Sweet. I feel like all of us do now. Who's actually an admin that knows that they're an admin and not just wearing several hats? That's more than I expected. So, my name is Karinne Bessette. I am a technologist with Veeam Software. I have a ton of certifications. That is the path that I took for technology, and I feel like it's worked out very well. I also do teaching on the side as a moonlight position. And just to say, I wear a lot of hats when it comes to life and as an IT professional, whether or not we're looking at the gaming side, the small project side. I recently got into 3D printing about 6 months ago, which has been fantastic. Happy to talk about that with anyone that wants to have a conversation. So, to kind of just rate and dive in here, I did a presentation at a security conference for the first time about a year and a half ago. And I wanted to make something up that would make everyone start to listen and tune in and say, hey, this is why you should listen to me. And I couldn't think of anything, so I Googled how to make money doing cybercrime. Pretty sure I'm on a list now, but it was 1.7 billion results, which in itself, it's a profitable business, so you know that it's always going to be a problem, it's always going to be advancing, because anything that makes money is going to continue to be a headache. And this was just, well, a year and a half ago, so I bet there's even more now. I like to start to set the stage before we get into some of the technology, because we need to think about the concepts more than just the how. We want to think about the whys in these type of scenarios. So the first one here is patches and 0 days. This is probably the bane of everyone's existence at the start of COVID, because you have remote workers. Do you think any of your remote workers actually updated their routers or updated their Windows or anything on their BYOD network? The answer is probably not. You had a couple. You had your rock stars out there actually implementing home security, your AIO, so your router, your modem and everything is what you're really dealing with. And lack of knowledge. And it's not due to a fact of trying, it's not their everyday job. They're fantastic at whatever they do, but a lack of what do I need to do to protect myself? How do I know that that link's not good? So having that training. Then we had a privileged account access. So everyone wanted to be an admin. They're at home, they can't run down to IT, and they're like, oh, can I just be admin so you don't have to remote log in every time I need a piece of software? This became a problem. So these are going to be some of the factors that we look at, how we solve them, and how to address them. Security planning, and I probably use this in every one of my security presentations going forward because it makes sense. You have a plan, it seems great, you pitched it, you got the budget, and then you start to run into pitfalls. Something costs more than you think it is. You weren't aware of any of your regulations because you're not a compliance officer, you're an IT admin. Your users. Users are always going to be a factor. You're going to do your best, but they're going to be a factor. And God forbid you fall under an audit because it's just that time of year. And last is any type of attacks. It's not really a factor of if you're going to be attacked, it's when you're going to be attacked and how fast you're going to mitigate that, how many layers you're going to put into place to kind of mitigate the damage that happens from those attacks. And I like to look at this as security bingo. Looking at the screen, does anyone recognize a regulation that you have to follow in your organization in order to meet compliance? NIST, CIS, or anything? What do all of these kind of have in common? Well, they all require layers of security, and that's kind of where the picture of the onion comes in. They all can be wrapped up in layers of security. And it really doesn't matter which security that you follow, as long as you're following something, you're going to be better today than you were yesterday. And one of my favorite from this is actually the AIC, formerly known as CIA, but CIA kind of got a little funny about that one and made us move around that acronym. So keep in mind, no matter what your integrity of your data, how you want to make it confidential, if your users lose availability to that data, you failed. So keep in availability and usability throughout this entire presentation. Like, oh, that looks like a great idea. I'm going to go back and implement that today. It may not work out that way for your end users. More statistics, because yes, it is a very profitable industry and it's growing. So average cost of data breach, $4.25 million. Average cost overall in this industry, well, by 2025, they're predicting, is $10.5 trillion. That's going to be the top industry if you're looking at businesses out there, period. No one's going to be making more money than cybercrime. Now, you can break most of the types of attack vectors or the way that you're looking at your contention points into 3 factors: people, process, and technology. And looking at each of these, it's going to be a combination of these 3 factors that are going to be your most detrimental effects to your environment. So if you're looking at, we'll skip that one. It actually is just going into the process and technologies, and I'll give you the PowerPoint at the end. If you have a pivot type of attack in your infrastructure, so say someone does a versioning attack on a user, limits their versioning to a low number, then runs an encryption type of attack on that technology, then phases out all of that data, then that user is completely compromised, and that's a user problem based off of passwords or policies, a technology failure based off of being able to exploit something in that technology, and now you've had a breach. Something else interesting here is, as of 2020, if you have an encryption attack or you pay attackers for exfiltration of your data, you can actually be sanctioned by the US government now for paying them, since a majority of these are backed by terrorist organizations. So be aware, you don't have a way to get your data back, and that's your only way to get your data back, you might consider contacting the government entity in your local area to say, hey, this is where I'm at. They may even have an encryption key for you to be able to get your data back without paying those data entities. But if you go and pay yourself and you find out later, you may be sanctioned by the US government now. Just keep that in mind. Now into a little bit more to do with the technology. Microsoft 365 has so many licenses, depending if you're government or if you're education or if you're business, big business, small business. How many know what the differences between licenses are and you had to purchase them or be the expert to purchase them? Okay, a couple of you think you know Microsoft licensing. So I got asked about this at my company, like, hey, can you give us a presentation on the difference between the licensing so we can figure out how we still add value? And can we have that tomorrow? I looked at them, I'm like, you're not going to want it tomorrow. And it took me 2 weeks reading through Microsoft documentation, third-party documentation, and contacting Microsoft support just to understand the e-licensing. Then I made a giant 5-point PowerPoint presentation on each of these licenses, breaking them apart, and what the real differences are between E1 and E3. You get the desktop applications. That is really what you are paying for. When you get from E3 to E5, you get security benefits. You get all these micro things in between. You get mid-grade security benefits at level 3 and 1, but level 5 is your security. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to participate with me a little. Every administrator needs to be a global administrator in order to do their job. Anyone? Yes? Perfect. And actually, even if you have to do administrative tasks, there's over, I think, 14 or 15 different administrative tasks inside of the admin console that you can configure for that specific admin to do their job, or creating separations of accounts to be able to do those configurations. You have Exchange, you have Help Desk, you have all of these different administrators. Not everyone needs to be a global administrator. In fact, the maximum amount of global administrators you should have in your organization per Microsoft policy is no more than 4. This includes your break glass account. Does everyone know what a break glass account is? Okay. So the break glass account, for those that are unaware, is the account that you use when all other access is gone. You only access this account when you've lost access through your primary infrastructure. The important thing of a break glass account is that you monitor this account. If someone logs into this account, there better be at least 6 people that get an email saying, hey, this account's been logged into, someone attempted to log into this account, because then you need to go and reinforce or check, change passwords, and see what it has done. Another thing is having the same account used to configure, manage, and use your environment be the same account that you log into your email every single day from about 12 different devices. If you are going to be an administrator and have an administrator account, that should be solely for logging into the admin console, the admin portal, and doing those configurations. And it be Admin Joe, whatever your naming convention needs to be. Then your everyday email account be Joe Miller at whatever your company name is in order to log into all of your devices to get your data. Have that separation. And enforcing a password policy that makes sense. I have a couple slides in here on password policies that include the NIST regulation and recommendations and changes that have come to that. There's a little bit of back and forth on what opinions are when it comes to passwords, but there's a couple that are kind of around password resets. Are password resets necessary? Who thinks password resets are necessary in an organization? Force password resets every 3 months, every 2 months, whatever it is. About 5 years ago, this answer would have been different. The regulation said, reset your passwords arbitrarily every 90 days. No more than 90 days should someone have the same password. We were under different times, we were under different protocols and different encryption all the way around. Having password resets actually encourages people to have weaker passwords. It's recognized even by NIST in their best practice password guides. In order to have a more secure environment, a more secure know your password with your end users, is to not have arbitrary resets for those based off of a period of time, but based off of unusual traffic, which you can configure in the Microsoft 365 environment. And more importantly, you should have things like multi-factor authentication or tokens that make sense, and having a banned password list. Having the right complexities, having more complexities, not allowing them to use named words, and following all of the password archives that you have online. Who knows of I'veBeenPwned.com? They have an API, if you didn't know, that you can tap in and say, hey, has this password ever been compromised before? You're more secure by having people reset passwords based off of compromised and banned password lists, and having something much more complex, less likely to have them write anything down if you don't have arbitrary periodic password resets. This here is actually within the Entra ID portal, which we'll hit play here and let it play here in the background. The Entra ID portal allows you to automatically set up a threshold for wrong password attempts, the threshold for those wrong password attempts, and the time frame as to what banned passwords are in the organization. And it's configured right here under the authentication methods. I will have a QR code at the end that will have a copy of all of these recordings so you can go take a look at yourself, all of the documentation on how to configure it within Microsoft 365 as well. Creating a banned password list just based off of the basics: no names, no known words, no company names, no company name projects, and the word password about 16 different ways, will then make your environment much more secure today than the arbitrary password resets. Another thing you can configure is something called session timeouts. People walking away from their computer, leaving their computer up, automatically being able to get back into that window. You can actually configure this within the SharePoint Admin Center in order to limit how long someone's able to stay signed in while in an idle state. These are just two configurations that you could implement today, and most end users would not even realize this has been done on the back end. So phishing comes in many flavors, and we come back to the why. And the important parts of why is knowing why each of these phishing attacks have been put out to know how to protect and educate your end users. We have the traditional phishing attack. You got an uncle in another country that died and you have now inherited some money. We need some information so we can get that to you for tax purposes. Very agnostic, very much anyone out there. Then we have something in organizations now which is actually spear phishing. This generally happens through some type of exfiltration of data and information from your organization to target your end users based off of their job, based off of your company emails. They'll put your headers in there, they'll use the same language. If you've ever had a breach in your organization, you probably had exfiltration of that data, meaning they know more about you, and it's a business now. They will take that data and create packages, and some won't even attack you at all, so you don't know that you've ever been breached. Sell that to groups of other people, and they make their money just by selling exfiltrated data from your organization, creating these custom types of attacks. Next is spear phishing. They have one objective, and that is to target a single person, a single small group like your C-suite, people that they don't expect to be technologically inclined, and then target them to give them specific data. This can even happen to your finance department. Getting an email from your CEO, CTO, C-something suite saying, hey, I need you to process this purchase order. We have a last minute order coming in. I just got off of the call with these people. We want to make sure we get this contract put through. Can you please get this done today? Sense of urgency, sense of pulling at them, sense of you're important enough to make sure our business goes tomorrow, and people don't think twice. This has happened in many of organizations that I've worked at. I can't say which organizations that has happened to, but it's even happened to where the finance lady went out and got gift cards. The head of the organization had a bad habit of making their underlings do things that seemed so arbitrary that no one thought twice, like, okay, I'm gonna go buy the gift cards, it's okay, I gotta get this done, because they are so particular about their needs. But the education of knowing, hey, this is the link, you should have contacted the upper parts, or following a chain of protocol, this is why. So the why. This one here is a feature, so just-in-time access. Just-in-time access is a way to be able to set something like a 4 eyes rule in your organization, or having a ephemeral account or temporary accounts that have access for given periods of time. The just-in-time access configuration allows you to say, hey, I do not want to have a secondary account that's my admin account. I want to be the admin. Well, set up just-in-time access, and your partner in your department has to approve your access so that you both know, like, hey, when I come back from lunch, I'm going to do this administrative attack. Please let me elevate my account for an hour post-lunch, and when we get back, I'll take care of it. If you don't want to have extra accounts. This does take a higher license in your organization, so this will need the E5 license or a P2 license, depending on how you want to add that. This is another portion of the multi-factor authentication. Not all multi-factor authentication is made the same. If you have a multi-factor authentication that only requires you to hit a button and now you're authenticated in your organization, you're probably going to fail. We have to do multi-factor authentication for so many things, people just hit the button without thinking anymore. This is Microsoft's 365 authentication that requires you to type the number of the authentication on the other side in order to reinitiate that authentication. So you have the two-way knowing, yes, this is actually what I'm doing, not something that shouldn't be logging into my organization. Here's the privilege identity management for configuring the just-in-time access. It doesn't take a whole lot, and it doesn't have to be a global administrator account. In this specific scenario, I've initiated the user administrator role to be able to be assigned for no more than an hour. You can determine the time that it starts. Then you can implement justifications. Keep in mind, the justifications don't have any type of data validation in their field, so it's all going to be for audit purposes later. Why did you need this access? And here's the ticket number. And then on the other side, for the 4 eyes rule, you can also require justification and reasoning for the person doing the approving process. So now there are 2 people accountable for what are in these fields. Has it been filled out correctly? And should this person have access? If nothing else, you can't automatically have it assign you privileges and permissions, but then you have narrow windows to check as to when you could have been breached in your organization. So you can automatically get elevated access by clicking a button, but then there's going to be a record and a notification to everyone else. Now, conditional access. Conditional access has been through a couple different iteration cycles through the Microsoft 365 environment. Just like everything else that they put out, version 1 was a little iffy. We know what conditional access is. We've worked in network configurations and in firewalls and things like this. Now, conditional access in the Microsoft 365 environment is a lot more broad. There's a lot more things that you can configure. And now they've brought back templates, which are super nice. Templates could be like, I have an administrator privilege on my account. You automatically get MFA assigned to you and you have to configure MFA. Great. Safe IP addresses, known locations. If you have sanctions, like if you're part of the US at all, there are certain countries we're not supposed to log in from or talk to. If you're 100% US based and you should never be going out of country, this is something government entities will do, is they'll block any login that is out of the country. If you're going out of the country on business, you need to put in a ticket so that you can get an exception under your name to be able to log in under these other countries. Otherwise, your account automatically gets blocked. There are other remediation factors like, okay, I've done a risky sign-in, which could be, I signed in from West Virginia and I'm from Ohio and I was just signed into Ohio 10 minutes ago. Well, it's kind of hard to get all the way down here. But if I have VPN, a data center in West Virginia, and it's just a riskier looking sign-in, I could force that user to do multi-factor authentication based off of those risky moves as a protocol. Even if you've already done multi-factor authentication for the day, you're in the middle of a session, you do risky behavior, you have to do that again. So it helps with those sessions being cached and worrying about that being your exfiltration factor. Now, this is my favorite meme that I've added to this, and this is about conditional access and applying it without putting it into a review stage first. I can guarantee you, if you do not review your multi-access policy and you apply it to your entire organization and you put it active right away, you're very likely to lock yourself out of your entire organization, and you're going to have a very fun conversation with Microsoft saying, yes, I am in fact who I am, and yes, I know there were so many warnings when I decided I was going to put in my entire organization, but can you please just let me back into my organization? So they have a review only process, which is going to give you logs on how this is going to affect your organization that I recommend you doing first. Then once you can see not everyone's going to be affected, then you can go ahead and implement it as a policy. I also recommend excluding your break glass account from this policy list, whether it's a group, put it into a group, maybe you have a couple break glass accounts for whatever reason. Have an exclusion list that excludes your break glass accounts because they're going to be a way that you can get back in without calling Microsoft. Here we're taking a look at one of the policies that are the custom policies, and I can put the user risk sign-in and put thresholds for that sign-in. This is a perfect example of change the thresholds, then put OK review only and see how many of my users are doing things that are not so great in my organization, and then maybe do some training and then implement the policy when you have a reasonable number coming back. And security defaults. So if you do make custom conditional policies, this goes against the security defaults and you are taking over security in your organization. But if you haven't put conditional policies in, you have security defaults by default in your organization. This will force administrators already to use multi-factor authentication. This works to block legacy protocols and protect privileged access and privileged access types of accounts. And then we come down to accepting risk. This is the whole thing of make sure you don't lose access, make sure you have accessibility. That is all acceptable risks that you're taking into your organization. One of my favorite examples, because I help work in organizations that are education, especially when you're talking about anything post-adult education. So multi-factor authentication comes up a lot. All of their cybersecurity policies want them to have multi-factor authentications. How many of you have kids out here? Anyone? Could you imagine your kid coming home with a USB that they had to keep track of the entire year? Yeah, that's not happening. Or saying, I need to have this 10-year-old have a cell phone that is open to all of the protocols from Microsoft in order to do multi-factor authentication, or get text messages from indescript locations, or have certain applications that you haven't vetted to do multi-factor authentication. That's not going to happen. So multi-factor authentication becomes a big conversation inside of education because it becomes nearly impossible unless we're going to put chips in our kids' hands to be able to slap this on a laptop, because that's the only way they're not going to lose it. Which, I don't know about you, but I don't want my kid having a chip just so that they can get into their school laptop and breach their data. You need other security protocols, like making sure there is absolutely no way that they could have any elevated access in the organization. They get their own network outside of the main management networks. They have to use certain kinds of additional forms of protocol. Maybe you give them all email addresses. They have to sign into their email address in order to get the multi-factor authentication when they're not on campus, and then completely exclude multi-factor authentication from on-campus IP addresses. Have been some of the ways that education has started to try to get around this. Now this is kind of a summary slide. If you want the quick screenshot to come back and remember, okay, what did we talk about? This is a good place to start. Mobile devices is the next section. So mobile devices, and this is another one where I'm going to ask you, threats cannot be mitigated in a BYOD network. That's not supposed to happen. 2 seconds. It's compromised. Thought I was on VPN, but then I guess I wasn't, so this is an awkward conversation. While I'm having a security presentation, I'm being breached. So how about this? Who thinks that you cannot protect your devices or your applications or your infrastructure if you allow people to bring their own devices? Anyone? Yes, no? No? Yeah, it's not. You actually have all kinds of things that you can implement on an application level without owning that device itself. So you can enforce encrypted emails. This means from the application layer itself, it's encrypting that email before it goes through the stack on whatever device that they're logging into until it reaches the other side that has the key to be able to read it. It's great. They also have secure mail flow. Secure mail flow runs in the Microsoft 365 Exchange servers, and it scans all of the links before it gets to your machine. This also works in Teams now, which is great. So when you click on a Teams link anymore, you get this little pop-up that says secure link, and then it scans it, and then it redirects you to the actual URL now. That is secure mail flow if anyone has that enabled in their organization. Data loss policies are another great way to mitigate anything, saying I cannot do exfiltration outside of this application. I cannot send outside of my organization unless specifically enabled for certain SharePoint sites. OneDrive folder protection. I use this in my lab. So I have a lab email that I have assigned with a OneDrive, a SharePoint, everything. I sign into that on every single lab machine that I'm working with, and it automatically copies my documents and my folders over to one location. So when I decide I'm going through and cleaning up my lab, I'm not losing progress on like PowerShell scripts I've been working on because they've already been saved on the back end to a single location. But I know I'm going to be using and burning those machines pretty quickly. And then application management. Application management is going to be a little higher. It's going to be something that your users consent to when they start signing into the Microsoft 365 applications from different machines, saying that they understand that this is protected by their organization without taking control of their app or their device itself. Now, there's a couple ways to still prevent the exfiltration of data. So you can actually block permissions for application consent. What this is when you download a new app or you try to access a new app that's going to access your backend data, it says, hey, can you consent on behalf of your organization? I'm sure many of you have seen that before. It's not just you that has access. Every single user, unless this is disabled, has access to consent on behalf of your organization to access data. Stopping this and then making them put in a ticket is the way to go about it. And then terminating auto forwarding rules. This is probably one of the more interesting attack exfiltration types I've seen in organizations. It's where an attacker goes into their email, forwards all incoming going email to a certain address. No one's the wiser because no one checks their sent folder or no one checks their forwarding rules, and then all of a sudden all emails in the organization are being sent to a threat actor. They gather that information and then they use that to sell to other organizations to be able to attack you. You can block forwarding rules and the ability to configure forwarding rules on clients within the admin console. Then limiting external sharing options. My organization, you cannot share data through a shared link in Microsoft 365 without it being internal. We do no external sharing unless specifically put in a ticket request. And there's been organizations out there that have shared their entire HR, entire finance to external entities when they thought they were just sharing a single file. Users are probably your biggest factor in your organization. If you're interested in what the legacy protocol conversation is, this is going to theoretically be terminated by Microsoft as of Q1 this coming year. They pushed it out a couple of times, but authentication through legacy protocols are basic authentication through their basic APIs. They use username and password authentication to transfer data. So far, things like public folders were things that were deprecated through the legacy APIs, but not put into modern APIs. You're still using legacy authentication and legacy APIs in any of your applications, including Outlook. If you have Outlook configured and it's based off of the username and password instead of the modern authentication with enterprise applications, you could have a compromised end user, or it may just stop working in this new year and you're going to have 100 people contacting you like, why can't I get into Outlook? Why is my internet not working? Or whatever the ticket comes in as. This is configuring the secure mail flow. Secure mail flow is configured through the Exchange Admin Center. And then you go in here and all you do is go into the rules. It's one of the automatic rules that you can configure and say, hey, don't forward anything outside of my organization that happens to look like it has a social security number in it. Boom, done. No worrying about anything else. Data loss policies are actually through the Compliance Center, which is now Microsoft Purview 365 or Microsoft just Purview now. This is one of the policies. They allow you to say, hey, don't allow anything outside of my organization. You can also do audits from here, knowing who has access to the finance department SharePoint that shouldn't have access to the finance SharePoint. You can check that through all of your policies. Now we're on to alternative forms of authentication. Username and password is not always the optimal way in order to authenticate your organization. In fact, if it's an application that needs to connect to your organization, using an enterprise application through what is now called Entra ID, but previously Azure AD, and using certificates is the optimal way to be able to authenticate your organization with an on-premises application or even cloud-to-cloud application configurations. If you're still using username and password, this is one of the things that will be deprecated, and you will lose access to your applications if you're using credential access instead of the enterprise applications. Tokens are used more on a configuration development level. You can use tokens that go through your Azure Vault. And having an SSO. SSO will save you so much time and actually make you more secure, because you are then monitoring under a single entity all of the things that your users connect to. You can then implement that into an SSO page, so they're always going to the right link, not misspelling ADP for some reason and going to an improper site, typing the credentials they shouldn't be typing in there, but an SSO page, so they know they're going to a company monitored site. Having the multi-factor authentication already built in through some type of auth exchange with the Microsoft 365 environment, or even implementing Okta if that's what you guys use. Depends. Now this is the summarization page, so you can come back and once this entire conference is kind of settled and go through what you might look at in your organization. Next one is audit and logging. Audit and logging is probably one of the single most important things to do in your organization, because you're not in there checking every single setting in your organization every single day. If you were, you would probably go insane and burn out within like a month. So you have different ways to do that, and because data is the life cycle of your organization, and it can be compromised, your passwords can be changed, and there's consequences. So this is a protection trends type of report from Netrix, I think is how you say that. And it's one of my favorite reports that I found out there. They did auditing between 2020 and 2022. They audited things like how long was each type of attack in your organization before it was found and mitigated, how long it took to recover from there, and then the consequences of those different types of attacks. From 2020 to 2022, it has nothing to do with all the words on the slide, but actually on the screenshot, they had a change in senior leadership due to attacks. I like the statistic because when you walk into an organization and you say, I can't get money, it's you on the line if something happens, so make sure nothing happens. Point this out and saying, upper leadership is getting more and more heat to make sure something doesn't happen, make sure you have the right people, and money starts to come a little faster that way. That's a leftover slide. So if you do run a device network where you're sending out devices to your end user and you're doing the mobile device management, you do get some added benefits. One of them is going to be the device wipe. It doesn't matter where it is in the entire world. If it gets internet access, you can completely remote wipe that device. Enforce BitLocker. You'll have application restrictions, so like a walled garden. And then you can locate lost devices. I don't know how many times when I was in an organization that had managers out in the field doing sales and things like that between different locations, we'd get a call about once a week. Which restaurant did I leave my laptop at? Can you please tell me that? And then you have to look up where the device location last was set, where the GPS coordinates are, and then what restaurant is attached to those GPS coordinates. If you do use mobile device management and you use the Intune access, you can actually keep the TPM keys and the BitLocker keys inside of Azure AD, which is now Enter ID. I don't know about you, but I have personally lost BitLocker keys in my life and not been able to get data off of laptops. It happens to the best of us. We configured it 15 years ago and forgot where we put the USB. So this is a great feature, especially when you're having end users do this to their own devices. Security and compliance. You have all kinds of reports in the Security and Compliance Center, what used to be the Security and Compliance Center, but now is Microsoft 365 Defender and Microsoft Compliance. Now you've noticed over time, if you've been in there, there's been this slight osmosis between those two centers. Some reports still kind of overlap, and some are specific to one or the other. Looking at it here, you have two different scores. One of them is going to be your compliance score. These fall more with regulations in the industry. Then you have your Defender score. These are more like things that Microsoft made this feature, and it's fantastic. Why is no one using this feature? Well, their documentation, and they come out with like 500 things every week. You miss one or two items, and the Defender Center will say, hey, we have this new option. You can assign it to someone, or you can put it on your schedule to then implement in your organization. There's also two different kinds of reports that happen on both sides. This here is the Defender Center. Now, if you're in the Microsoft 365 admin side, it will still say security. And then you'll click on it. And then the top bar will say Security and Compliance Center. And then it'll reload to be Microsoft 365 Defender. The cool thing about this is you have your score, but the Defender side also has training video on here. And they're actually better in some cases than the training that you have on learn.microsoft.com when you're trying to look for show me security things. This actually has all of them together. It has them organized by which type of thing that you want to implement in which part of the center. Then we have Purview. Purview is the more compliance side. Really, the biggest factor here is you have your compliance score, and this is also where you do e-discovery and set up your retention tags. And also, if you're not the only administrator in the entire organization, you can do searches from this side to see what's changed, when it changed. I'm in charge of the billing for my organization on the lab side. And we have a lot of administrators. We have 14 different administrators in here, and I get an email about every other month saying, the number of licenses have changed in Microsoft 365, just to let you know. So I have to go in and run an audit report inside of here saying, okay, show me all administrative access for license change or users added or removed and who they were added or removed by. This then kind of trails me back to how licenses were added or removed from the organization. And I do a periodic audit like, hey, I'm in charge of this environment. I don't care that you're adding users. Just let me know because I have to put it on my expense report and justify the reasons for increasing or decreasing the number of users in the organization. Now, Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics gets confused with the Microsoft 365 environment because there's so many overlaps in these names, but this is different. This is an endpoint type of configuration that mostly is used on an on-premises type of environment to show network and traffic flows to make sure there's not some type of traffic that's not supposed to be there. It detects abnormal logins, risky users, and it uses AI on the back end in order to give you a report of where you might have a problem or too much traffic to be able to handle, and you may have a spotty outage for your users. Azure Sentinel is a paid service by Microsoft. Azure Sentinel is scary cool. It's used AI longer than AI was ChatGPT and out there in the real world. What this does is it uses a series of plugins into not just Microsoft 365 environments, But AWS environments, on-premises environments, GCP environments, pretty much anything out there has a plugin into this environment, and what it is it's a SIM. All of these logs from these environments come to a single location, and Microsoft parses the data for known types of attacks, or it could be, okay, out of how many ever people are using Sentinel that have these 3 plugins enabled, have a incident that happens here, that's just a notification, another notification incident here, and another notification incident here. It knows that these 3 things together have been the start to 10 different attacks that it's been able to detect in the later stages before, and gives you early access to do remediation plans. It is scary cool, but it also comes at a cost, and the cost generally isn't in the license, but the storage that you're sending that data to. I always recommend, if you are going to initiate with Sentinel, turn it on for an hour, turn it off, wait about a week to see how much data costs that you have associated with it, and then assess and use the risk management, assessment, judgment that we all have to say, is this worth the cost? Is this going to detect in my organization? This is the summarization of all of that for you to go back and just quick look at if you want a refresher from everything. And on a final note, this is the Microsoft Teams user group. I looked, and it looks like there's not one recently initiated in West Virginia. Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, I know all have one, but there's a bunch of them on here, and there's new ones popping up all the time. This is the central place that all Microsoft people are putting these groups. And Microsoft MVPs get bonus status for starting up groups in certain areas. So if there's noise about wanting more information, they'll give you updates and sometimes inside information to what is coming so you're prepared. As promised, there is the URL and the QR code that has all of the demos. Inside of the place where the demos is, there's a password in that line to be able to type in to get to those demos and demo access, and all of the slides. And that's it. Are there any questions? Well, I appreciate all of you joining me.